Go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us about your journey with dogs and what led you to the program you have now.
My parents, Noel and Tina Green, they founded the breed which they called the Aussie Bulldog, the Australian Bulldog, back in the 80s. Into the 90s, it sort of really started to take off. There was another breeder in the mix, Pip Nobes was her name, and they had this adventure of creating a bulldog that was fit for the Australian climate, but had breed aptitudes similar to a bull mastiff, so healthier in structure, length of snout, length of leg, length of tail. But at the foremost was their nature. Bull mastiffs are known to have such a loyal and doting nature. And you mix that with a bulldog who their crazy antics created, a beautifully balanced creature. So they're more than just a dog. I've always been in the background, obviously being a child of parents who lived and breathed the Aussie. Mum only retired from breeding last year due to health troubles. And my husband and I and the kids, we've had the Aussies, but we haven't bred. I've always supported others, and I take great pride in documenting the ancestry as well. So I like seeing where they've come from, where they're going to, breed percentages, and that sort of thing. This year really is probably our first year where we will plan to have our own program, which is really just continuing my parents' program, the Jag Aussie Bulldogs.
Talk about the beginnings a little bit more. Was it always in the idea that the bull mastiff would be the with the English it would be a good mix, and what was the decision to add any more genetics to the burgeoning breed?
Originally, my parents had what you would call a pig dog. So a pig dog breed makeup at the time was Staffy, Boxer, Bull Mastiff. That combination of breeds was then combined with an English Bulldog for the heavier bone. Breed makeup was Staffy, Boxer, Bull Mastiff, and then British. And then they found their balance with percentages. So the structure and type that they liked the most, that was the most fitting to the climate and had the consistency in each litter, was between that 70 and 80% British. If they dipped down below the 60, it sort of wasn't high enough, and anything over 90 was too high, and the dogs in front of them had the same attributes as a British. They sort of cemented that guideline in percentages with that mix of dog.
The culture down in Australia of them utilizing different genetics to create dogs to fulfill a function is amazing. Breeds like the bull Arab and a lot of these other mixes, and then the cattle dogs is just the Kelpie and all that sort of stuff is just an amazing dog culture. Do you know what the percentages of, like the bull mastiff to the boxer to the staffy? What was the percentages
The
of?
breed makeup of them was around that 30, 40 to 50%, but obviously the combinations took time. So, a combination was done of the pig dog mix to the British, which then gave the name Aussie Bulldog. But then obviously you're not going to have the next dog that has the same mix of the Staffy, the Boxer, and the Bull Mastiff. So they would be running multiple lines as such. And then this is where Pip Nobes come in, when she had a similar breed makeup in her dogs, but then also the English Bulldog. So then they combined the two lines. A few years in after that, there was a family called the Couchy family who had Johnson American Bulldogs, which again brought in that leg and the type. There were some health issues, obviously, amongst all breeds to be mindful of. So trying to find that balance to not accentuate a particular health issue, but just to try and find that balance of the length of leg and tail, the open nares, the length and snout, and that really loyal personality.
What was some of the first dogs that kind of fit what they were trying to accomplish, the F1s? What were some of the things that they saw health wise and morphology wise that made them realize, hey, this is something that we've got something good here?
Definitely their agility. So their ability to be able to run and jump, and obviously with the changing climate too. So in the hot weather, that that they're not a dog that is inside in the aircon. They're able to adapt to the outside climate and not be frothing at the mouth and overheating. Like some breeds are known for their stubbornness and their lack of thought before they do things. So trying to find that balance. Bulldogs are dubbed a stubborn breed, or they can be silly, but they are actually incredibly smart. They really are. They just thrive off of routine, and discipline's not the word, but once they know their boundaries, they're good, but they still need to let their energy out. So a dog that was able to run around and be silly, but as soon as you say, righto, come on now, they would pull up and listen, but weren't a house dog in the aircon. They were able to come outside, get on the back of a bike and go up the paddock. You'd be fencing properties and they'll be at your feet, and obviously you're not going to be out in the sun in the middle of the day, but a very adaptable, very, very loyal bulldog in type dog, but just with the exception of just getting some more agility, and like I said before, with the English, at the moment, there's some oldie English that have definitely caught my attention, and looking at their similarities in structure too it's mind-blowing, and to me their fit was definitely, I believe, what my dad had in mind with the Aussie was like a bull mastiff in structure, but not as big, but more variety in colour. Yeah, their nature's a second to none. It's definitely a fine balance, definitely, and it takes time. At the moment over here, there are a lot of high percenters that sit up in the 90s that do look like 100% British. Those combinations, that there is a use for those in your program if you've got lower percenters and your type is stemming away from what the breed standard was. Yeah, but again, it's genetics. They are not they're not recognised as a purebred. The furthest generation I know of is a 6th generation. So that's where an Aussie has gone back to an Aussie 6 times over with no health issues, and has still kept that structure to the standard that was first created. Because of the gene pool, there is the need to go back to those higher percenters to keep the bloodlines going and not getting too close with line breeding. To be able to keep those particular traits whilst balancing the health of the animal. And then there's other things that come out, like DNA and hip and elbows and spine and trachea, and the list is huge, absolutely huge. But we can't be taken away from the physical dog in front of us either, while we try and tick off as many of those boxes as we possibly can, because at the end of the day, you may tick all of those boxes and the dog in front of you looks nothing like they were originally created to look like.
Yeah, I think the interesting part about these composite breeds like the American Bully or the old English Bulldogs, and you can see here in the United States that the many variations of old English Bulldogs. Some of them look more like Bull Mastiffs with a little more English Bulldog features, but they are, they're more Bull Mastiff in look. And then you got some that are more American Bulldog in look, and then you got others that are more English Bulldog in look. There isn't really a cohesive strictness to people's programs to standards. It's what suits their particular program and the dogs that they have in their yard. And for me,
Yeah, and that's exactly what's happening over here. There is no mandate across the board, because obviously breed registries are run by volunteers, and there's not one breed registry for the breed. There's now several. Once upon a time there was one ancestry register. Now there's several, all run by volunteers, and breeders will give the hype to sell a puppy and say, we are true blue Aussies, and but at the end of the day, it is hard not to believe that it's only put out there for a dollar value. Actually, for the breed standard, to preserve that history, and humans are a funny race. We'll buy what people tell us to buy, and how it's marketed. Those who follow the original standard, I don't feel that they gloat and promote. They know their lines, they know the history, they adore the breed, and they breed to then create that next generation, to watch that consistency flow through. I do believe they've got the right interests at heart, but in a market so influxed by so many dogs on the market, obviously, to be seen amongst that is hard, but I don't believe that's in the current breeders, forefront. In the forefront of their mind is keeping with their program, tracking their history, and watching that next generation evolve of a consistent in type Aussie. And I believe in time there will be more balance. Just at the moment, I think in general there's just so many designer breeds and mixed breeds and pups in general on the market.
One of the things that is about these composite breeds, especially when you're dealing with dogs like bulldogs, bull breeds, is it's hard to maintain that genetic look in a dog that you're trying to create, because to get things like better hips and structure and all those sorts of things, the dogs that you use to do that, those genetics are really strong when you're talking about, like, a boxer or a staffy. It doesn't take many generations for those dogs to really show those type
Yeah.
of breeds in them.
Yeah.
So it seems like it's a constant battle to make sure that the bulldog look is still there. And so talk about like how that's done, and done in a way that you're still wanting to keep the health and the structure alive. It seems like a really tough balance.
It is definitely, like, there's a lot to assess, without stemming back too many generations. So you do rely heavily on other breeders and other breeders, with the same passion and going in the same direction, because they need to stem their lines in another direction, but you still need to bring them back in to meet in the middle and then go again. So, like we just spoke about, that passion for that consistency in type, they want that structure, they want that snout, they want that tail and that agility. It is much easier to go back and access a purebred English, British, than it is to do your homework and find that third, fourth, fifth generation Aussie that has, met all the markers with hips and elbows, structure and DNA, etc. They're, again, it is, you'll have those plain in type females and you'll go back to a heavier male, and vice versa. But sometimes that doesn't actually balance out. Where we see the most consistency is where a third or fourth generation has gone back to a third and fourth generation, and they all come out looking like they are a purebred. They're consistent. Three quarters are consistent. You might get a throwback there where you're into a fourth generation and you get one with a short tail, even though mum and dad had long tails and their grandparents had long tails. Here comes a short tail from, the great grandparent. It's just, all down to that genetics. You can balance it out as much as you want, but there's always going to be surprises.
How important it is to have those dogs available that maybe don't fit the standard, but they offer something to the table when it comes to the overall bigger picture.
Yeah, definitely important. But again, it comes down to, who they're with and the program that's in place, because, it's a fine line between promoting what they refer to over here as backyard breeders that just whack two dogs together and, label them an Aussie. And, there's no, if pups are sold as pet only, they're generally sold as pet only because the breeder doesn't want to continue that line for certain reasons, or they want to be very selective with their lines and hold back the genetics for future planning. But once they leave your yard, you can't physically stop somebody from breeding with them.
These dogs have new genetics, and there's things aren't so far back into their gene pool where things won't pop up, and where you need to course correct, and that 90% or that purebred British Bulldog is a tool for your program. It's not necessarily what you would consider an Australian Bulldog or an Aussie Bulldog, but it's also a tool that you guys have to utilize in a breeding program, in a type of dog or breed like the Aussie Bulldog. And I think people don't.
Absolutely. And like you said, being able to use their qualities in a good way, where, you've wanted to bring a new line in, and for a fact that, the parents and grandparents and great grandparents behind that particular dog have been of sound health. It's not just looking at that dog. You want to know about their parents, their grandparents, their great grandparents, because of that continual throwback. Even though they may present as, on paper, everything ticks the boxes, but there may be, some things that health wise had come up in their parents or grandparents that weren't disclosed. But you'll pair that dog with a third or fourth gen Aussie, and now you've got a new health thing arising, and you go, where has it come from? And you can only tailor it down to the introduction of the new. There's a lot of assuming, but when you track your lines, you've got a fairly good idea of what comes from where, to stamp it out. There is a need to bring in the new lines, but you have to be quite sure with who those lines are coming from, and the homework and the passion that that person and program has put in, that they haven't just picked up a dog because they look great and the tests are all great, but you've got to dig down below surface level. But I believe, most people that are in it are in it for the right reasons, and there is a need for the higher percentages as much as there is the low percentages, to keep the gene pool going. And I'm sure eventually we'll all meet in the middle with a very consistent in structure Aussie. But at the end of the day, Aussies are Aussies, and I think we just all fall in love with their personalities, their stubbornness, and the same as humans. We all come in all different shapes and sizes. But same as the Aussie, different shapes and sizes. There's definitely a goal there of what they were intended to look like, and that goal will always be there. But we're always going to have, the little shorties and the ganglies. But most will be reaching those markers for how they were.
Longevity of a program like this, is there things that you guys do to ensure some of that? Like, do you guys utilize the modern technology of health testing and genetic disorder testing, or is that
We do, but we take it on board as a marker, because even though, like I said, that they may appear pretty on paper, the dog in front of us may structurally not be agile, be a loud breather, might have skin conditions. There's things that you can check. They're not going to guarantee you completely health. Like if you could breed a puppy and say that they're going to live for 15, 16 years or hell forever, and never have an issue, that would be amazing. But we all know that life happens and things happen. We can do our DNA checks and our hip and elbows, our respiratory function gradings, etc., but we still need to be looking at the physical dogs in front of us that we choose to pair to create that next generation. So there's some amazing tests out there, some support networks, but we can't wholly and solely rely on those as the basis, behind who we choose to pair. To me, they're simply markers. And we've got to look at the dogs that are in front of us.
Yeah, that's very well said. And it's for me, doing tons of research and talking to now probably 1,000 breeders or whatever it's been, or more, um, and and listening to some really, some experts in canine genetics and all of that sort of stuff. You're right. You said exactly what a seasoned canine geneticist would say when it comes to breeding dogs. They're definitely bring some levity to the new technology that people seem to be relying too much on, instead of
Yeah.
just using it as a guide. And one of the things that they talk about is that this is more there's a famous Irish veterinarian, Dr. O'Neill, I think is his name, and he just said he calls it disorder testing because it's not health testing. We're just testing for disorders, and it's not going to tell you that this dog is going to be healthy. And like you said, you have to
Yeah.
look at that dog in front of you,
Yeah.
and and if it doesn't tick all the boxes, you either breed it for with the appropriate pairing that has the things that dog is lacking.
Yeah, absolutely.
or you just don't do it at all. And then,
Yep.
and yeah, right. So yeah, it's just,
And sometimes it is those hard calls. Like you might get to a fourth generation and go, wow. And then the markers not make it, and you've got to look at, if it's genetic, then it doesn't continue. And then you go again. You go again. You don't persist because, hey, look, I've made it to fourth and on paper it looks really good, and we want to get to that next generation. There's no point. It brings way too much heartache. You don't just think about, what they'll produce together. You think about, you know, yeah, the pups that they do produce, but then the homes that they go to, you want to know that you've potentially, produced a very, very, healthy and happy puppy. Because if heartache happens, in that home, it stems back to you as well. You've got ownership right the way through. And I know as a breeder, that's definitely not something I'm willing to do, because they're more than just a dog. Yeah, you'd love them for them to be with you for as long as possible, and not present with health issues. So yeah, even though you put so many years and effort in to get to a certain point, and something goes astray, unfortunately, yeah, that is one of the hard parts of breeding. You've got to pull up there and go again.
yeah, for sure. It's one of those things where you kind of have to have a analytical mindset sometimes, instead of leading with your heart, and that's something
Yeah.
that I could see being very, very difficult. And when it comes to good dogs and healthy dogs for families and stuff, I admire breeders' ability to be able to do that, because the bigger picture is that you do want to bring joy, and have your animals that you produce loved and cared for. So
Yeah.
and part of doing that is breeding, healthy specimens and stuff. So um talk about like the years of with your, you said your parents, your mom, and how is the beginnings to today, how has it changed and evolved, and has some of the mindsets changed from the original idea, just by, sure, by breeding and understanding what you're trying to accomplish. And sometimes you say, well, I want this, but then the more you get into it, you're like, oh, wait a minute, this makes more sense. Is there any examples of that's gone through
Yeah.
the years?
Yeah. Definitely. Like I said, breeding um, really relies on partnerships and fellow programs, and that's where the Aussie initially started, was with fellow programs where you had Pip Nobes, and then you had Nolantina Green, and then later on the line you had Couchy, who had a different breed in general, but they managed to mix together. I believe the partnership of Pip Nobes and Nolantina Green would have been a great one. But then, the human factor happens, and you've got the difference in opinions. And I believe Pip really admired the boxer, whereas Noel favoured the mastiff, the bull mastiff, the heavier structure. And I think at the time, the bull mastiffs had a cleaner health makeup than some of the available boxers did at the time. And that led to them parting ways, and the real emphasis on having, an Aussie of bull mastiff type. The things that I've seen change over the years is definitely the standard in regards to the weight. The females used to be between 20 and 30, and the males used to be between 25 and 35. That weight has increased to, the girls are in the 30s, and some boys are reaching the 40 mark, purely from that massive input. I think, in the earlier years, communication was probably easier. Anyone and everyone who knows Noel, he could talk underwater. He would give everybody his time and his knowledge. But I guess, as the years go on and the world changes, it doesn't seem like as many people are open to those real conversations. Those hard hearing conversations. So I think that's probably one of definitely the biggest changes over the years is the market, I guess you'd say. He didn't, and Pip didn't do the breed, with the intention to, make money. The intention was to create a beautiful companion that everybody could have in their homes and adore and, get to experience. I think the biggest flip has definitely been the marketing side and people forgetting the real picture and the real history behind the breed. And keeping conversations real. I'm quiet at heart, I think, because my dad was definitely very, very vocal, and over the years you are exposed to a lot of conversations, a lot of politics, and Aussies were absolutely their everything. And as a kid, sometimes that didn't sit well because you were just like, oh, maybe if I was one of the Aussies, I'd get more attention. But that now that I get older, I realize it was their passion. Like that's where their heart was, and their dedication to just keep continuing through the years. And is that you or Pup snoring?
I'll show him. Yeah, he's my little friend. He's my big old Frenchie. He's the big boy of the group there.
It's like, oh, this Sheila's putting me to sleep, Dad.
Good old Artie. His name. Yeah, he's a great dog.
How old?
He will be 2 years old in December, so he's like a year and a half. Yeah. Yeah, he's a good boy.
Timed it well.
Yeah.
She's off on a tangent again.
No, it's great. It's great. It's interesting that the dog world is no different around the world. The United States and Australia are light years apart, but it's the same sort of. It's the same sort of
people with the passion.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that when you talk about how do you maintain a dog breeding program with that uncomfortable subject of money, and that's something that by doing this podcast and talking to so many different breeders from all different backgrounds and breeds and all that is like, and then today's world is things are so much more expensive, and the world economy is doesn't seem as stable as it once was, especially in our Western countries like ours. Taking for granted the extra money that we may have is kind of tougher to part ways with, because we don't know what's coming down our So, but at the same time, how does a breeding program survive without being able to at least pay for itself? So it
you'll do pairings, and you will go backwards, and then you'll do pairings where you do cut even with your costs. It just all depends on which and way it ends up, you might end up with a female who, doesn't whelp naturally and ends up in a C-section in the middle of the night, and your regular vet who their prices is not available, and you're off to another vet whose prices are completely different to one that you're used to, and then you only end up with one or two, and it's not for the lighthearted, that's for sure. Those sorts of things are not disheartening, but you keep going because you're passionate. You're doing it for a reason. It's that history. And it would be nice to cut costs and even come out with some each and every time. But if that's your only reason behind it, then I don't feel like that's fair on the dogs. They're more than that.
The conclusion that I have right now is you have to have passion first, and think about the other stuff later, the business side of it later. I mean, if you're not willing to lose, then this is not the wrong game for you, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, just owning, 3 French bulldogs and a big livestock guardian mastiff type dog and a little shih tzu. I have 5 dogs, so even owning 5 dogs is not for the faint of heart.
Yeah.
The whelping process you talk about, like, is natural whelping one of the things that you guys are trying to accomplish on a regular basis?
Yes and no. At the end of the day, it's you always put their welfare first, and it's down to the individual bitch. She might be long in torso and look the part, but like birthing in any breed or kind of animal, things can change. You might get a pup that is trying to come the wrong way, and he has got dad's big head and he's the first one in the line, and then you're one up in a cesarean, but then you might have several bitches over a few years continue to whelp naturally. You'll have some that will pop out 9 babies one after the other. Then you'll have others that may only have 4 or 5 on board, and it takes them a few hours with the first 2, and then you may wind up in a cesarean for the last 1 or none. It all just depends on how the girls go. You do what you feel is right for them. Obviously, going under a cesarean, it's major surgery, and they do take a bit to recover from it. But if it means it's for mum's life and the baby's life, that's the way you go. But the aim was definitely to have bitches who whelp naturally, and a lot of the times they do. But then things happen and things change. I know some programs are set on C-sections. That's their safe place. They know their dates. They know their girls. That's their security to make sure that mum and babies are okay. But obviously, when they're doing that, I'd like to think that mum will then in turn have less litters and retire earlier. But again, that may not be the case. But personally, natural whelp is definitely what we aim for. But we obviously play it by ear, and mum will soon tell us which way it needs to go.
So if I asked you with your program to paint a picture of what a perfect Aussie is. So when you breed and you're deciding to keep a puppy, what do you want it to grow up as? And I'm like the males and females. What is the sweet spot for the height, the weight, the structure, head type, all that? Can you kind of paint a picture with your words as far as what you think the ideal Aussie is?
Yeah, so with the girls, they've got that structure. They are generally leaner in type than the boys, but you can get the girls that have got the heavy bone, which you would like to see in your boys. Yeah, that length of torso, nice solid head, but finer features. With a boy, that nice solid bone under them, that square head like a box on a box, tail if you can, or half tail. Um, they just seem to balance each other out. It's not often you would get a female that outdoes a male. Um, it's probably not a pairing you would go ahead with. You'd want to match them to either be, equal in type. But generally, you're always looking to pair with a male that just complements her, plus adds some oomph. But yeah.
And what is the ideal temperament between like a male and female?
They're pretty similar. Obviously, with females, their moods change, because they have a heat. So, as expected, they do go through windows where, one day they're right all running together, and then next minute, they're snappy and giving each other the stink eye. But, they're about to come in heat. So, separation is required. The boys, very teddy bear like in nature. But that's across the breed, really. If you have any, behaviors that are concerning, that's considered before pairing. It may not be something they pass down, but I can't help but think that it will be. We've had one of the Jag girls was very, very high maintenance. He was go, 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 go. And it did come out in our pups. There's, people have the idea of, some bulldogs, they're lazy and they lay around and they sleep. And no. They need an outlet. They need to get that energy out. And then they're willing to mope around, but they're bred for their agility. They need to get this thing out. But yeah, back to their personalities. Yeah, very similar. The boys obviously don't have that spike like the girls get. I think for the pure fact that the girls have a heat. The boys, they come into in the same yard as other boys, and again, the only time you'll see a change in their behaviour is if there's a female coming into heat. Then the boys' behaviours will change towards each other, which is just human nature, I guess. But in general, very loyal, very switched on, very goofy when they want to be, but definitely not any aggressive behaviours. But it all depends on how you read it as well. They will give you clues that if something is not sitting right, they won't turn and do something wrong. There'll be a history behind it first. Or there's something that's not right. Like they may be suffering from pain for some unknown reason, but that's not their character in general. That'll be a brief window where you go looking into it then, but in general, they're a really cruisy, loving breed. But obviously, running towards the front fence, you think, oh goodness, I've had other breeders come over and I wasn't well recently, and another breeder come over and she left flowers on my back veranda for me, and the girls come running out and she said, "Oh God," she said, "I shit myself." Just that, their substance and the way they held themselves, and even though she knew them and she's a breeder herself, they even put the wind up her. But as soon as they got to them, they covered her in slobber. They're definitely all looks. But yeah, they had her convinced not to come in the yard.
That look and the presence, but then it's just like a big old ball of love when you get close and you get to know them and all that.
Yeah, and you do hear some sad stories with behaviours, and you know if everyone knew all the answers, things wouldn't go wrong. But not everyone has the same education, and not everyone has the same perception of what they believe the behaviours are. There was sadly a girl that got put to sleep because she turned and bit the breeder's partner. But once I delved into this story, it was apparent there was several bitches of different breeds, and two of those breeds, one was a Staffy, and it was currently in season, and it all come down to the lack of separation when separation was required, but she had showed them behaviours that it was all too much. The Staffy was too much for her and the other dogs were too much for her. But in the end, unfortunately, she paid the price, and that broke my heart because it all comes down to perception and the environment that they are in. You can breed them to be, a certain way, but it all comes down to the individual, and again the environment they then go into. They don't come pre-trained and follow the rules. They've got to adapt to their new environment, and you work with who they are.
Talk about what you're trying to accomplish with your program and people that you're working with, and what's the significance of the Jag line or type.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jag is Noel and Tina Green. They are the founders of the Aussie Bulldogs. So, the structure that they set out and the standard that they set, there's still a lot of breeders currently who only have dogs from Jag lines that work in with each other. And like you said, they all have those same goals in mind to keep the breed going for who they know and love them for, and that aim for that consistency in type where possible, but balancing out the health and the traits in the individual dog first. It's not an overnight gig. It's they're lifelong companions, and we get to spend our time with them, and we get to watch who they create, and then go on to that next generation. So definitely some passionate breeders out there who have got beautiful homes and so much love for the breed, and that their goals are to keep continuing to that next generation, and keep the Aussies happening.
So the kind of the division is that there some of the new school of breeders had their own ideas, and so to distinguish what the original purpose was, is that's the purpose behind Jag.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel, without knowing, their programs personally, but continuing to breed up in the 90% as close to British to me is easy. You don't have to. You don't have to have a program in place for years and years to get to a first or second gen. you can pick two dogs willy-nilly and call yourself a breeder. Those that have stuck to the original standard have been around a very long time, and those breeders are the quiet ones, I think, due to the politics of it all, and the smoke and mirrors of the new ones that come through, and they are more educated and more tech savvy with communicating with the viewers and the puppy inquirers, opposed to the long termers who don't delve into the politics. They don't need sales tactics. But if you want to give them a call for a chat and talk about the breed, they would be happy to sit down and talk with you about the breed. They're not just, hey, how much is your pup and when can I pick him up? These breeders want to know that you know the breed, or you want to know about the breed, and have those deeper conversations, because they're in it for the real reasons, not the dollar figure, and they've been in it for the hard yards and will continue through the hard yards, even if in the current climate they are perceived as the minority when they are actually the originals.
What registry do you register your dogs with, and what do you find that is the main Jag style Aussie registry? And
So United Aussie Bulldog Association, so UABA, is the original registry. There are other registries that are out there, but I don't believe they've got the same protocols in place with as to who they register. UABA will do homework, so the breeder needs to be registered. Those dogs need to have an ancestry certificate behind them. An ancestry certificate is not created unless there's 4 generations of dogs behind them that can be accounted for. And the first 2 generations, they need to have seen, by photograph evidence or video evidence of the parents and grandparents to match those registered names. I do believe other registries will paper them based off of who the breeder says those dogs are, with no finer background checks as such, if that makes sense. So there's a huge window there for falsifying documents within those registries, but then also documenting, dogs as Aussies when at the end of the day they probably aren't. I seen a certificate from one registry, and one of the dogs in the mix was actually a pug, and the other one was a Boston Terrier. And it blew my mind that had made it through, but the registry will ask for a membership fee and then charge you a fee for each certificate. But I think the key component that's lacking is they are a registry for multiple breeds, so is the background checking. But unfortunately, it's opened up a big window for dogs papered falsely as Aussies.
I'm a big proponent of crossbreeding.
Yep.
I believe in it. I think if you can create something that's healthy, happy, and it could be a good pet and still fulfill a look that you're desiring, and you're doing it to get a better outcome for, say, a French bulldog, and it's for a purpose. I'm 1,000% behind it, but don't lie about it. That's the problem that I have,
Yeah.
and that's what
Yeah.
what just drives me nuts. It's like it's what
Your
kills.
words there hit home. Noel was there. There was no shit talk approach. It was just straight down the line, and some things that were said didn't want to be heard, and other things were okay. Yep, we will hear those, and you can't pick and choose what you want to hear. But when it comes to the welfare of the dogs, falsifying documents is not bettering the breed, and because the registries don't communicate it either, there's probably inbreeding happening out there and dogs being bred from that weren't supposed to be because of health issues 2 or 3 generations back along the lines, but because of the sake of $1 and someone going, yep, we'll register them for you without doing any checks. It just continues those negative aspects. It doesn't achieve anything, but they get away with it. But yeah, I think that's the best qualities of the UABA is the history is front and foremost. Evidence needs to be provided for those dogs. There was a big case actually recently in Australia with Frenchies where people paid top dollar for these particular Frenchies, and it turns out they weren't actually the pups of the parents who they were told, but that's what they were papered as. So then I think that's throwing up a big case with one of the registries because they're talking hundreds and hundreds of puppies with false documents because no evidence was provided for proof of parentage. It's all based off of, what the breeder submits. And I guess, once upon a time, there was that trust component, or, the gene pool was smaller, so you knew of those breeders and you knew the dogs that they had. But yeah, like you said, it's definitely a story for another day because yeah, it'd be an eye opener if you went looking into it, that's for sure. But where we stand with the UABA, yeah, we know for a fact who those dogs are, where they've come from. The registry may only be small, but it's not about numbers. It's accurate, it's consistent, and it's clean history, and yeah, that's the way it will continue.
One of the things that is interesting to me that you kind of alluded to, this is a very fascinating subject for me, especially when you're talking about bull breeds, and especially today. I think I recently saw like mini bull terriers, which is a breed that I'm very fascinated by. The coefficient of inbreeding is through the roof. There's just not enough. There's just not enough
in the gene pool.
Yeah, and so it's some of these dogs are coming out like 40%, and to me that's really high, and it's almost dangerous, but I guess if you're preservation, you almost, I guess if you love the breed and you believe in it, and you almost have to do it, and it's like a damned if you do and damned if you don't type of thing. So how do you guys perceive line breeding, inbreeding, and is the coefficient percentages, is that important, and is that what you guys look at too when you're making some of your decisions?
Yeah, it is. When line breeding is approached, you need to be educated in practically all dogs on that ancestry certificate. So the ancestry certificates display 4 generations of dogs. So line breeding that is approved is, a grandfather to a granddaughter, or a great grandfather to a granddaughter, or an uncle niece. But the closer you get, the more sure you need to be of any traits, because that line breeding will cement the type. So you will get consistency in type. But if you have hidden any health traits, they will become prominent in that pairing. So, if someone had, say, cherry eye, for instance, and, someone's decided to cut corners and just have eye surgery done and breed from the dog because, hey, they still look good. And, you do a line breed there with a grandfather and a granddaughter, and you end up with a full litter full of cherry eye. There's definitely a need to to line breed with the gene pool, but there's also room not to, because they've been around that long. There are plenty of programs out there that are at third and fourth generations that are completely off the pedigree to another dog, but you go back to that fifth, sixth, seventh generation, you'll see some crossovers there. But on that current pedigree of the 4 generations, there's no crossover. But there was once upon a time, because they're Aussies, that's where they've all come from. So yeah, you've got to stem away, but you've still got to bring it back in to tighten the mold with what you're looking for. But if there are other options out there, you'd probably do that first beforehand. But again, a good line breed, it is good for the breed. Most certainly no inbreeding.
Right. The opposite question. So, when you're is there a time for an outcross to happen to make sure that you're trying to keep a look and a structure and health, or is there enough genetics now that you don't need to say go back to the bull mastiff or the staffy or whatever, or is there a reason to do something like that?
That's a good question. The outsourcing, you sort of just look at the option of going back to the British, because normally the reasons for the outsource is, you've got leggy, you've got long. We haven't seen the other way around where you've got too much bulldog in appearance, and you need to go lanky, because you can find plenty lanky amongst those.
Okay.
So there hasn't been a need to consider that original mix, because that gene pool has been widely spread across every state in Australia, and that's one of the positive things with the breed, is they've struck a chord in a lot of hearts, for there to be so many breeders. We're seeing a lot of there's a few long-termers who have wrapped up just with the current day and age, and there's probably no other politer word for it, but just the bullshit that comes with breeding. But yeah, there's definitely hasn't been a consideration to go back to those original mixes. More so getting in clean British lines, but there is that many over here, it's not funny. And there's so many first, second and third generations that is still in the 90 percenters, because that's where they're comfortable. But at the end of the day, the dog looks like a British, it doesn't look like an Aussie.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Has there been any like an Old English? Would that be something proper, or is it strictly British because you're still wanting that bringing down to
That's where it all started from. In 2006, Noel wanted to look at bigger structures again. So he had another line which he dubbed the Southern Cross Bulldog.
right.
So they were a phenomenal looking dog. They had the look of a bulldog, but almost the structure of a big bull mastiff. But with that was a new line of health concerns to be mindful of. And I think he found that, he already had one passion project. that one, the Suttons, didn't take off as much. There are still a few people that delve in a Southern line. Most of those Southern lines that were started were meshed back into the Aussie lines, which I guess cemented that bull mastiff in structure tight, but it also expanded the color palette, if you would call it that. So those that were started were condensed back in with the Aussies. So yeah, there was a time there where it did go out, but it stayed within the Mastiff breeds, and then was condensed back into the Aussie type.
Is your mom still involved in your program at all? Does she watch from afar, or?
Yeah, she does. But it's taken its toll over the years. She's definitely been exposed to thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people, and it has been her life, in my whole time it has been her life. So I guess now she's trying to approach a less full lifestyle, and more simple, and learning that for her has been hard, because the Aussies were my parents' thing. That was their thing. Sadly, my dad, he passed away in 2016, and that took a massive toll on Mum. And she continued with the breed, but then put her sort of stamp on it as such, because obviously she knows exactly what he wanted and what they wanted together. And then bred for 8 more years after he passed. Yeah, just decided it was her body. Yeah, her body's telling her. I think if her body didn't start telling her, she'd still be doing it. She does it in her sleep. What am I doing right and what am I doing wrong in my mum's eyes? Yeah, that's a good question. I think doing right would be that I've got a big heart. I'm very passionate. I do put my whole into everything. And yeah, I care from the start to the finish. Doing wrong, maybe exploring outside of where her and Noel got to with their lines. I don't know if that would be being wrong though. But yeah, maybe some exploration into some new lines. But yeah, again, that's probably the wrong answer for the wrong question. But yeah. A breed that would interest me outside of the Aussie Bulldog, and a breed I've never owned or known personally before, but I'm fascinated by, is definitely the Oldie English. There's some breeders overseas that have definitely caught my attention, particularly the structures and type, and their consistency as well. I would definitely be intrigued to put them side by side with a true Aussie, and yeah, compare apples to apples. Advice I'd offer to a new breeder or anyone wanting to breed the Aussie Bulldog would be, do your research, keep your history, remember your reasons why you want to breed, and always refer back to that original standard. The Aussies were created with love, with a purpose, with passion, and we'd love to see that be continued by, stemming back to that original standard, obviously tweaking it where you see needed, but definitely document your lines and, don't cut corners. It's been really great chatting with you. It would be amazing if Noel was still around, because, you wouldn't get him off the phone. He would have given a lot more insight than I was able to, but definitely grateful for the opportunity to have a chat with you about the Aussies, and love to have a chat with you again soon and touch on any further questions that anyone may have in regards to the breed. And we'll continue enjoying the beautiful breed that they are. And thank you again for your time.
BSC Podcast. We don't play, we bite. All grit, no gimmicks. Welcome to the Bulldog life.